Welcome to the 23rd meeting of the Public Audit and Post-Legislative Scrutiny Committee in 2020. Before we begin, can I remind members, witnesses and staff present that social distancing measures are in place in committee rooms and across the Holyrood campus. In addition, a face covering must be worn when moving around, exiting and entering the committee room, although they can be removed once you are seated at the table in the committee room. Our first item, can I record the apologies of Bill Bowman, MSP. Agenda item 1 is a decision on taking business in private. Do any members object to taking item 3 and 5 in private? If Neil Bibby, Colin Beattie or Willie Coffey, who are joining us remotely, object, please raise your hand. Excellent, that is agreed. Agenda item 2 is the Auditor General for Scotland's draft work programme. Can I welcome our witnesses to the meeting today? Stephen Boyle, Auditor General for Scotland, and Anthony Clark, Audit Director from Audit Scotland. And can I invite the Auditor General to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, members. My paper today invites your feedback on the draft proposals for my strategic audit priorities and longer-term work programme. The proposals focus on the key risks we know COVID-19 is already creating for public finances and public services. No one knows how long this pandemic will last and what further new issues and challenges it will throw up. The pace at which events are unfolding and the need to respond quickly to emerging issues and risks means I need to build in flexibility into my programme. I'll briefly set out my thinking on the themes I intend to focus on in my planned work. I've grouped the work programme into 5 key themes, being equalities and outcomes, economic recovery and growth, policy priorities, innovation and transformation, and lastly, governance and accountability. Equalities is a key theme. It was an important issue before the pandemic, but different groups in society have been disproportionately affected. I'll look at how public bodies have responded to the many equality-related economic and social challenges. Outcomes from public expenditure are what make a difference to people's lives. I believe public audit has an important contribution to make to testing whether the Scottish Government's improvement ambitions in key areas such as education, employment, health and social care integration are actually making a difference. COVID-19 will have a significant impact on the Scottish economy and public finances for many years to come. Some of that impact may be permanent. How well public money is being used to rebuild the economy and repair the damage caused will also be a key area of focus. I will work closely with my colleagues in the Accounts Commission, which audits council spending as part of this work. I've used the term following the pandemic pound to describe this work to track and report on COVID-19 spending. The pandemic has highlighted the importance of many long-standing areas of interest to both me and the committee, such as good governance, openness and transparency, financial controls and effective long-term planning. We'll also factor into our work the elevated risk of fraud and the issues thrown up by the challenges to governance arrangements caused by the pandemic. Alongside supporting my role in effective accountability, I also want to look forward and contribute to learning across the public sector when Scotland moves towards recovery and renewal. Progress has been made during the pandemic in areas such as digital service delivery and aspects of partnership working. We need to learn from this and think about the major transformation challenges that lie ahead for Scotland's public services. I'm planning to look at topics such as digital transformation, collaborative leadership and workforce planning. A further area of interest for me in my long-term programme will be the Scottish Government's progress in the context of Scotland's new financial powers. My audit work will continue to keep the overall position and devolved public finances under review. Convener, today's material focuses primarily on my performance audit work, but it's worth me briefly noting that a core part of my work is also in auditing the financial accounts of all non-local government public bodies in Scotland. Those audits inform my Section 22 reports, which supports the committee in holding the Scottish Government and other public bodies to account. I will bring a number of these reports to the committee annually, and I'm also considering how best to report to the committee on matters raised in previous Section 22 reports. Finally, Convener, I want to ensure that my longer-term programme considers key risks and key areas of interest to the committee and the wider Parliament, and is focusing on those topics that will add greatest value in supporting effective parliamentary scrutiny. I'll use your feedback to refine my longer-term programme, which I anticipate publishing in early 2021. Convener, Anthony and myself, and Anthony, who leads on the development of our longer-term programme, we're delighted to answer any of the committee's questions this morning.
Thank you so much, Auditor General. Can I kick off on the pandemic pound? You mentioned that the tracking of the money. Does Audit Scotland have a live tracker in terms of the public pound and the outstanding monies? And if not, can it create one? And if it does, should that be public?
Thanks, Convener. I guess there's a number of strands to that. We prepared a briefing paper which we engaged with the committee in August, which set out at that point how much additional money had come to Scotland. I think, if memory serves me correct, it was 5.6 billion was the figure at that stage. We've also created a kind of public-facing part of our website, our kind of COVID hub, which also sets out our own work and the scale of change and COVID monies that are coming. It's something that we can give a bit of focus to as to whether it's through that vehicle or elsewhere is the best way to track that. It's clearly part of our work, and kind of we signal in our papers that there'll be a range of different mechanisms which we'll use to shine a light on not just how much money's been spent, but in due course the effectiveness of that spending too.
So just on that, so I mean, I was looking at that briefing paper. Given how fast everything is moving and how quick we're having spending commitments around COVID, look at business support, etc., that figure is already out of date. So, I mean, do we have a more up-to-date figure of what the outstanding monies are, and how often should that be updated? Because waiting months, I don't think is credible anymore. I think that that needs to be much more regular, what the outstanding monies are.
So you're right, it is an incredibly fast-moving pace. The rate of change as to the monies that are coming to Scotland, whether it's through Barnett consequentials as a consequence of UK government spending decisions that flow through to Scotland, or indeed Scottish Government's own commitments, the pace does require regular reporting and updating. We think we've got a role to play in that. The Scottish Government absolutely does too, in terms of ensuring that there's openness and transparency in the scale of monies that are coming. It's certainly one we can take away. You're right. We did report in, I think, the 5.6 billion figure, which would have been to the end of July. I think it'll be reported in August. The figure has grown since then. It really matters that it's clear about the scale of money that is coming to the country, and that people can track and follow that. I don't think we'll take that away, Convener, just to think how best.
Do you have a number? Do you know what it is?
So I think I'd probably be kind of cautious about just saying what the latest number is. I think it's certainly now over 7 billion, but it's one that I probably need to come back to.
Because the last public figure I could find, because I was looking at this for the new restrictions that were coming in and the level of business support, the last figure I could find, but again, it's out of date, so the reason why I don't want to quote it publicly in terms of any interactions, but the last public figure was around 630 million of unspent money that exists. Now, I'm not claiming that 630 figure is what the figure is now, to be honest, I think in terms of accountability and transparency, I should be able to know how much money is still not spent in order to challenge or support what the government might want to do or what you might want the government to do. So having that figure, I think, is really, really important.
And we agree. We think there's a real need for openness and transparency. I think that's what we sought to do in that paper in August, was to actually collate all of the monies that had come to the country. I remember in that conversation, Convener, that some of the unspent monies, I think, we sought to explain why that might be the case, particularly with many elements of the spending being demand-led, and would depend on uptake from businesses or other groups, and also that some of the monies spread over more than one financial year. So in that paper, and I guess the purpose of it was to bring additional openness and transparency to it.
But on the principle, you're happy to engage with government and set up a live tracker?
Indeed, I think it's really important for a conversation between ourselves and government so that there's ongoing transparency on how much money has come and indeed how much has been spent. Great.
I think Graham Sims has got a supplementary on this point, Graham.
Yeah, it is on this point. I just wonder, I mean, I think it's good that you would look at a live tracker, but in terms of actually reporting, I just wonder how regularly you could do that. I mean, could you do it on a monthly basis or every 2 months? Because it is so fast-moving.
It is fast-moving. I think it's one that we'd probably want to take away and have a proper think about, just about the mechanisms for which, either through ourselves or perhaps for government, to describe the money that has come and capture the frequency within that conversation too. The overarching point remains really important, is that there's a real need for openness and transparency, but we do have some sympathy that the pace and indeed elements of the predictability of the money is just to kind of tease all of that out before we're definitive on how frequent we do that.
Willie Coffey also has a supplementary on this line of questioning, so I'll go to Willie Coffey, who's joining us remotely.
Yeah, thanks very much, Janice. I think Stephen said there, it's really probably a matter for government to track this spend and money that's allocated, earmarked, spent or otherwise, but obviously for Audit Scotland to take a look at that. So I'm not sure that it's really within Audit Scotland's gift to set up a mechanism and a tracker to do that. It's probably something we should press government on.
Stephen Boyle, you want to come back in on that?
So, yeah, I accept Mr Coffey's point. Actually, I think in an ideal scenario, government will set out, and indeed government will set out, in due course, in addition to a live tracker, the spending through, annual report and accounts, which will be subject to audit. So there's clearly an audit role alongside, government's own financial reporting. What we looked to do in the briefing paper was in August and think about additional mechanisms beyond that date, is to capture, I suppose, the volatility and pace of change in the entirely new circumstances that we're in, was to support the openness and transparency and indeed parliamentary and public understanding of the scale of money. What we haven't yet done and will feature in our work to come is to, in due course, express judgments on how well that money's been spent.
No, I completely accept that fundamentally it's the job of government, but I think in normal circumstances, an annual report of underspend is fine, but we're not living in normal circumstances. The scale and speed of what is happening, and then the scale and speed of how we're responding to what's happening, I think requires more audit, not less audit, and more transparency, not less transparency. And I think that's the central point I'm trying to make, is that's partly Audit Scotland's role in terms of the transparency and audit of the monies, but I accept the point that it's for government to obviously lead on transparency, you would hope. But if you can take that away, Auditor General, and come back to us, that'd be great. And the other part I wanted to turn to was the inequalities work, and I completely support the inequalities work. I think if there's two big issues that have dominated 2020, it has been inequalities, particularly race disparity, when we look at the Black Lives Matter campaign and movement, as well as the pandemic. And so I'm really keen to see what race disparity work is going to happen alongside the other equalities work that the Audit Scotland is functioning to do. Now, I know in previous conversations that we've had at this committee that it's something that the Auditor General has said that you will go away and look at and come back to us and see what your statutory roles are. I think you need to go beyond your statutory roles, to be honest, when it comes to inequalities and race disparity. So I'm keen to hear what more work is going to be done around that particular race disparity that we have in the public sector, and then hopefully making the public sector lead by example into the third and private sector.
Thanks, Convener. Actually, you're quite right in terms of the context you set out about the impact of inequalities, and particularly through our BAME communities, and how the COVID implications have been felt. We're still thinking really carefully about how we fit into any particular race disparity audit, whether it's something that is work that we should lead or whether it's another organisation. We're also very conscious of the fact that the Scottish Government itself has an option to play a role in undertaking its own race disparity audit. It's a further conversation for us to explore with them where they will decide to do that. For us, I think we're thinking about absolutely in terms of the impact of BAME communities, and also the wider impact of the pandemic and how that's touched other communities. We mentioned in our paper about on the impact on younger people through the impact on loss of education and so forth. And so we're thinking about it absolutely in the round, and part of the kind of race disparity is part of that equation, Convener. What we haven't yet done is to settle whether that's best place for us to do that work, or government, or indeed for some of the equalities and human rights bodies.
I suppose the only thing I would challenge back in the Auditor General is it's one of those things that we can try and find whose job it is, and then we spend all our time trying to find out whose job it is, and no one actually takes the lead and does it. And to be honest, that's what's happened for years and years. So what I'm really keen to see organisations do, that's the Scottish Government, that's Audit Scotland, and that's any other institution as well as the social leadership. So anything that you have an ability to do as an organisation, I would quite like to see organisations do it. So Audit Scotland can lead and be a trend setter and a gold standard on these issues, and I would quite like Audit Scotland to do that, as well as the Scottish Government, and I have the same engagement and conversation with them as well. That's not a party political thing, that's just a fairness thing. So I would quite like not just conversations and discussions to happen and let's see who will do what, social leadership, and just do it, please.
So I entirely recognise the importance of this issue, Convener Luke, and to reassure you of that point. Ultimately, it needs to be done. I think my point is that it's whether to decide if Audit Scotland is currently the best placed organisation to do. Like yourself, if we don't see any action on that, there's absolutely a space for Audit Scotland to come into if that's where we get to.
When's the deadline for seeing that action? Before you think Audit Scotland might need to step in? So
I think what we set out in the paper here is that through this consultation process and to hear clearly the views of the committee, the wider Scottish Parliament and others, that once we've corralled all of that, to come back with a published final longer term work programme in early 2021. I think by that stage we can be clear as to whether a race disparity audit by Audit Scotland or whether there's clear progress elsewhere will be sufficient.
Okay. I look forward to seeing that work and engaging in those conversations. And the final part from me before I turn over to Colin Beattie, it's just a general question about when you think Audit Scotland, I suppose it's probably a two-part question, is one, when you see Audit Scotland starting to do some COVID response audits, more specifically, and then secondary to that, working remotely is going to be a thing for the long term for Audit Scotland. How do you see Audit Scotland's ability to audit performance remotely, not just financial audit? Auditing spreadsheets and numbers is quite easy remotely, but how do you audit performance remotely?
I'll ask Anthony to come in about how we are undertaking our performance audit work remotely. Anthony leads a number of our teams that are currently doing just that work, and he can say a bit more about how that's going. In terms of some of the specifics of COVID-related reports that you'll soon see, perhaps the first and maybe indeed the most important will be our NHS overview report, which will come to the committee in publication in early 2021. That will take a look at, in many aspects of the NHS's preparedness and response to COVID. The team are actively involved in that work, engaging with NHS colleagues and Scottish Government on that. And by that point, we'll be able to begin to be clearer in our judgments about how well the NHS has performed and how well it was prepared to deal with the pandemic. We'll also be reporting through the Scottish Government Section 22 report on the consolidated accounts towards the end of this year, which will also set out the government in the round about aspects of its arrangements and how COVID has impacted on its performance. And beyond that, we touched in the paper, Convener, we're also proposing to undertake an audit of personal protective equipment and the arrangements that were in place in Scotland and the cost of some of that expenditure during the course of the year. So there'll be so in this paper today, we set out some very specific pieces of work that we're committed to already, and whereas in others it's more thematic areas that we're kind of thinking about and how we'll develop those into outputs. But I can ask Anthony to see a bit more about our performance audit activity and how that is working.
Thank you. Anthony Clark.
Thank you, Acting Convener. Yes, just to give a couple of examples to you about how the impact of COVID-19 is affecting our performance audit work. We have a couple of pieces of work going on at the moment, which Stephen's already mentioned, the NHS Overview Report and work on education outcomes. And yes, it's taking longer to do that work. And yes, we need to be thoughtful about the pressure we're placing on people that are trying to deliver services during the pandemic. But what we're finding is we are able to do the work. You know, people are keen to talk to us about their experience of what's happening around the pandemic. And they are happy to engage with us in terms of interviews, focus groups, and so on and so forth. We're able to get data electronically. Many reports are published and available, so that's giving us a good source of evidence for some of our performance analysis. So it's having an impact, but it's not stopping us from doing our work, Convener.
Thank you. And I'm now going to turn to Colin Beattie, who's joining us remotely.
Thank you, Convener. Auditor General, I want to explore a few the points that you actually raised there. In the previous sessions in March and June with your predecessor, the committee asked about the impact of COVID-19 on the annual accounting and audit process, given that many public authorities, of course, are focusing their resources on responding to the pandemic. Which makes me a little bit anxious about Section 22 reports. Are there any Section 22 reports that have been delayed, which would obviously be a concern? Maybe you can give us a bit of an update on how that's being managed.
Thank you, Mr Beattie. Yeah, the short answer is yes, our work has been delayed, as Anthony mentions too, that the reporting deadlines for public bodies were put back a number of months this year. NHS, which would typically have reported at the end of June, was moved back to September. Central government remained largely unchanged because they had a statutory reporting deadline at the end of December, but with many different local arrangements in between. Local government bodies who the Council Commission audit have gone to end of November as opposed to what had previously been September. So there's a range of arrangements in place. We are closely tracking and monitoring all of this with public bodies and our auditors about the pace of public reporting. And it's I think I've previously used the phrase a mixed picture, I think, to describe how that reporting is progressing. Public bodies and our auditors are absolutely making progress. We hope that most public bodies will have completed and be able to report their audit work by the end of this calendar year. We think that's really good progress, I think, given the uncertainty and having emerged into the pandemic, not expecting to have to conduct either remote accounts preparation or remote auditing, that represents good progress. In terms of Section 22 reporting, the process for that is fairly well established. Once the audits are completed, there'll be conversations and recommendations from auditors, consideration by my colleagues and myself about which areas of public interest will be necessary to bring to the committee. We're in that process at the moment, and once we're through that, we'll be able to say publicly about which bodies I intend to bring to the committee as Section 22 reports. I'm able to say that there will be some this year, Mr Beattie, and we'll start that over the next few weeks.
Given that Audit Scotland's aware of historic issues in different areas, for example, of NHS, are you prioritising these areas that might be perceived as being weaker or more of a concern?
One of the things we're very conscious of, actually, I think, as alluded to in my opening remarks, is that there were issues that existed before the pandemic, and the committee itself has considered progress and where some public bodies have had in recent weeks. And you took a report, you took evidence in the last month or so from NHS Highland, for example, on the progress that organisation had made. Many of its issues were long-standing. So we're looking similarly about other Section 22 reports that we've previously brought to the committee, and either options of preparing an updated Section 22 report or finding an alternative way of reporting to you on the progress that those bodies have been made. That's all in our thoughts as we finalise the programme of statutory reporting.
Yeah, I mean, the committee, no less than yourself, obviously is looking for some reassurance where there's been ongoing issues, that at least there's movement in the right direction.
I'm absolutely happy to provide you with that reassurance of where there's an appropriate reason to update the committee, either through a Section 22 report or through an update report. We'll absolutely do that and ensure that you're able to track progress or otherwise from public bodies that you've previously had reports from.
Just moving on slightly differently. Again, in previous sessions, we've discussed the audit reports that your predecessor was planning to publish, but they were put on hold because of the pandemic. Now, your work programme document refers to areas of audit work where you're already committed. Can you maybe update the committee on the approach that's being taken? Are there some audit reports that were planned but not included in your work programmes? I mean, I'm guessing that's probably inevitable.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Beattie. I think I'll ask Anthony to provide us with some of the detail around the reports that we looked at carefully. The substance of how we got to this, so at the height of the pandemic, at the start of March, or mid-March rather, we took the decision to pause our forward work programme as had been committed. For the very good reasons, my judgment was that the work that we had committed to may or may not be what's the best use of audit resource to deliver judgments on the circumstances that we're facing. What we look to do today is really to kind of signal to you, the committee, here's our restarted proposals. You're right that there are some aspects that we are revisiting. Education outcomes is a good example. But I can ask Anthony just to say a wee bit more about how we are effectively merging either work that had been underway, incorporating COVID dynamics into that, and then say a bit more about some pieces of work that we've decided now is not the best time to progress with. Anthony.
Thank you very much, Auditor General, Ms Beattie. As the Auditor General says, there were some pieces of work that were paused at the start of the pandemic. The most obvious one was the Education Outcomes Audit. We are in the process of doing further work on education outcomes at the moment, looking at the impact of the pandemic on school education and the way in which Scottish Government and local authorities work together to provide education services in what was a very difficult time. And that report will be published probably in March next year. There were other pieces of work that were in the programme that, when we reflected on priorities, felt less important. For example, there was an audit planned on waste management. Our view was that waste management probably wasn't the most important topic for us to be focusing on at the moment, so therefore it was taken out of the programme to free resources for us to focus on things that felt more pressing and important in the context of the pandemic. Other pieces of work, such as skills planning and investment, are still in the programme, but we're taking time to think about what the impact of the pandemic is on the skills planning environment and the planning for jobs and renewal. So therefore that work will still happen, but a bit later in the programme, and it's reflected in Stephen's proposals that are in front of you today. And there are other smaller pieces of work, but important nonetheless, such as a briefing paper on teacher workforce planning that again we took out of the programme to free up some resources. The more general point is that all of the work that we're doing at the moment will have a COVID angle, if I can put it that way. The impact of the pandemic has been so widespread and so all-encompassing that it would be almost impossible for us to do any piece of work at the moment without having that at the front of our minds. In many ways, the programme I have in front of you is an evolution, if you like, of the things we were planning to do before. But in many areas, we've had to reposition and think about the focus of the work in a different way as a consequence of the pandemic.
Just looking at how this work is going to be carried out, given that I would imagine virtually all the staff in Audit Scotland are working from home at the moment, the staff in the areas to be audited are working from home, and I would imagine the accountancy firms that you've contracted to do various parts of the audits are working from home. What reassurance can we have with such a multiple level of remoteness that we're getting a robust response, a robust report out of this?
It's a really important point. I think, as Anthony mentioned in his earlier answer, we are doing this work. We are engaging remotely with public bodies. You're right to say that our colleagues and audit firms are all working from home and working remotely. But we're absolutely clear, and really important point to make is that doesn't, in my view, make any difference in terms of the quality or robustness of the outputs that we'll produce. One of the factors that we thought really carefully about was the timetable. Things are taking longer, and we're making allowances for that. It does, as we're becoming used to how to work to audit remotely, we need to build in a bit more time to make sure that we have the necessary evidence to produce the robust judgments that we need to. A key part of our work, a key part of our arrangements is our quality framework that extends not just across our financial audit, but also our performance audit activity as well. That's remained unchanged. We're continuing to make sure that we have the necessary evidence to support the judgments that we're making. We do some of that quality checking internally, and we also have arrangements with the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Scotland to come and evaluate and test our work too, to make sure that it's compliant with the international auditing standards that govern our work. So that essentially that's the place that we're at. Things are taken remotely, but the last thing that we're going to compromise on is the quality of our work.
Well, that I'm pleased to hear about. I suppose my concern is, from what you're saying, that everything's taking longer, and that means that you're going to be able to do less reports. Other reports are going to have to be pushed into the future, and that will snowball a little bit if this goes on too long. So you've got a choice of either more resources to allow you to catch up, or you just accept the fact that maybe some audits in months to come may or may not be able to be done.
So it's a really important point. That so you're right that we've talked about the work is taking longer. Fundamentally, I don't think now is the time for public audit to shrink back. I think public audit has a really essential contribution to make. We've talked about already this morning about the scale of new monies that are coming to Scotland, the challenges that public bodies and public services are facing. And I think public audit is essential in terms of offering the assurance to yourselves as decision makers, to the people of Scotland, about how well that money has been spent. So for me, Mr. Beattie, it's not about us shrinking back, and I think we have to be mindful of, we're in scarce terms of public resource, but I think public audit needs to be shaped appropriately to ensure that the breadth of our work is sufficient to address all the challenges that public services are facing.
But I think the point I was making was that given the reality that audits are taking longer because it's more complicated doing it remotely than it is if you're able to visit and be face-to-face, that means you've got a finite amount of resources. They're being tied up longer on less audits. Audits that might be done are going to have to be pushed into the future, hopefully to be caught up later, or maybe fall by the wayside. I'm just trying to get my hands around whether that is a fact.
I'm not sure we're able to be definitive about that yet. I guess what we've seen is audits are taking longer, but we're also learning as an organisation. So we're now into 7-8 months of having worked remotely. Our learning has improved, so we now we have arrangements in place across the organisation and with public bodies to facilitate the delivery of audit work. Anthony's mentioned a couple of examples about how well we're doing that. So I don't necessarily know if it yet means that we're in a steady state. I don't think we are in a steady state yet. I think there's still remaining opportunity for us to develop, learn, bring in efficiencies, as opposed to everything will continue to exist like that and there'll be a snowplow effect. We'll always prioritise in terms of our audit work. And I think what we're looking to do today is to set out, here's the range of factors that we're considering, and to come the start of next year say, and here's where we think our priority and where our efforts can be best spent.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Mr. Beattie. I think there's a supplementary question from Graham Simpson, then I'll go over to Willie Coffey.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener. Auditor General, you said that audits remain important, and of course they do. But your colleague, whose name I can't read through that screen, Anthony Clark said that there's a couple of reports have been delayed: waste management and teacher workforce planning. Well, it seems to me that both those areas are very, very important during the pandemic and have been affected. So the whole nature of waste will have been affected because we have less people working in offices. I mean, you just think about this place. This place will be producing much less waste than it used to. So you will have less commercial waste, probably more domestic waste. There was, for a period, an increase in fly tipping. So I think that remains important, and teacher workforce planning is really important because we know how the education sector has been affected by this. So I would just urge you, to really consider these are important areas and perhaps reconsider that one.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that feedback, Mr. Simpson. You're right. Everything is important, I suppose, is the circumstances that we're in. Waste management, teacher workforce planning. We thought they were important before the pandemic, hence featuring on the programme. We still think they're important. for us at the moment is that there is a finite level of resource, and we're trying to accommodate and prioritise therein. We'll certainly take that away to think about how best we can accommodate those studies, and to think about where and when we can best deliver upon that.
Thank you. And we're now going to go to Willie Coffey again, who's joining us remotely.
Thanks very much again, Convener. Auditor General, good morning. I wanted to ask you about 3 aspects of your work. Firstly, the issue about continuing to push the public sector bodies to embrace recognised management and development quality standards to promote continuous improvement. Will you keep that agenda going, keep the pot boiling in a sense with that, so that we can hopefully see more progress with this over the coming years?
Yeah, I'm very keen to start in action. Anthony may want to say a wee bit more about that. The short answer is absolutely yes. We are, really recognise our role is twofold in many respects. Yes, the assurance about how public money has been spent, but also the other side about that is about supporting improvement across the public sector. We are, and the committee will of course have considered many reports over the years about where quality standards, improvement standards haven't been either in existence or applied as necessary. Many of that, you'll know, Mr Coffey, have been in respect of digital projects. So we're keen to play our part in that. We signal that in the paper today about supporting good practice, implementation of effective quality international standards. We see that as a key part of our work, and we're just thinking about how best we discharge that part of our responsibilities. But Anthony may wish to say a bit more.
Just to confirm what the Auditor General said, Mr Coffey, innovation and transformation is deliberately in the work programme because we think it's really, really important that we grasp the learning and share the learning that we identify through our audit work. And we certainly think that what we're seeing around the pivot that people are doing in terms of new models of service delivery is something we need to really capture and report in our audit work. And I think the quality standards and learning and development that flows from that will be very important, particularly in terms of how people can adapt in more agile ways whilst not compromising the quality of what they do. And if I might just dwell on this section for a moment, we have in this section as well workforce planning. So just to reassure Mr Simpson that workforce planning is very much in our minds, and teacher workforce is part of our thinking around that. The audit work we're doing at the moment on educational outcomes does have a weather eye to the pressures that we might see around the teacher workforce. So it isn't that we're ignoring that issue, just in case you were concerned about that.
Thank you. Back to Willie Coffey.
Yeah, thanks for the answers to those. I was just wondering though, Convener, who actually presses our public bodies to embrace proper and recognised management standards? They usually only come to our attention when they haven't been as a result of some work carried out by Audit Scotland, and then we discover that there are no recognised management standards in place. So who is it that should press that agenda? If it's not Audit Scotland, who should press that to try to get that kind of continuous improvement agenda right across the public sector?
I'll start again. I'm sure Anthony will want to contribute to this as well, Mr Coffey. I guess ultimately, we have as you'll know, that each individual accountable officer for public bodies are responsible for the effective running and proper budget management of their organisation. So ultimately, they are personally responsible for ensuring that their organisations are run properly. Layered on top of that, there are many other actors, roles about supporting effective running, improvement arrangements, quality standards and so forth. The Scottish Government clearly has an important role. Particularly, I know the committee's been heard much recently about sponsorship arrangements, but that's a key part of that. That the Scottish Government is supporting public bodies appropriately, particularly those smaller public bodies that may not have access to the level of skills and expertise in-house. And elsewhere, there's a range of professional network groups, public institutions, all of which should be, being considered to ensure that public bodies are accessing the right level of standards and skills. But so it's quite a wide and varied answer, I suppose. But ultimately, I guess the measure of how well public bodies are performing will be set out in their public reporting and the effectiveness of what the experience that service users get from those bodies. But Anthony may wish to say a bit more.
Thank you very much. I don't have much to add to the Auditor General's comments, in that I would have simply made the point that the Scottish Government and others have an important role to play here, and that it's quite a crowded landscape. There isn't a single body with overall responsibility. What I would say is that a theme in the Auditor General's work programme that you might see under governance and accountability is to do with collaborative leadership. And I think this is an area where we may be looking to identify good practice and share learning in some of these areas that you're interested in. Mr. Coffey.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Coffey.
Yeah, that's really very helpful. Thank you for that. The second query I have for you, Auditor General, it's about the whole digital agenda. I'm pleased to see it appearing in your programme of work, and particularly the inclusion-exclusion aspect of this, possibly made worse by COVID. There have been some really good examples of digital engagement, but of course there are risks with it too, that it could further lead to further divisions and within the access to digital technology and service. So I'm pleased that that's there. The other aspects of the digital agenda I want to ask you about were, of course, are you intending to keep an eye on the IT developments that are coming along stream so that we continue to get a focus on that? And with regard to the European Union, the Brexit issue that we all face, there's a digital side to that too that I was hoping you might wish to include in that programme of work. And of course, it relates to what happens with the digital single market when we leave the European Union. There's a huge issue in there for us, and my question to you is simply to ask you to keep that on your radar when you're looking at the digital agenda across the board.
Thanks, Mr. Coffey. I shall cover all of those points. You're right, we are very interested in the digital inclusion-exclusion agenda, and I think we signal in the paper, particularly thinking about there's a range of factors to this, but the digital arrangements that were in place in our education system over the course of the pandemic, thinking about the extent to which our young people were supported to access learning during the pandemic, and the adequacy of those arrangements going forward. So there's a range of strands to that. We also reflect on the recently published strategy from the Scottish Government and COSLA, thinking about how well that will be implemented. So we're monitoring that too. IT developments across the public sector will always remain a key part of our interest. Very likely through, in addition to the work that local auditors will be doing about the progress that those making, and also thinking about where there's those major capital IT projects, how those are progressing. You'll know, Mr. Coffey, in the committee too, that those haven't always gone well, and I appreciate you've held a number of conversations with Scottish Government officials about the arrangements that they have to support. So we're keen to see the learning from those projects that haven't gone well, and to see how that's been disseminated across public bodies, especially those smaller public bodies, where they're tackling large-scale IT projects, perhaps for the first time in many, many years. So we'll always keep a close eye on that. On the EU exit arrangements and the digital point, yes, we are tracking that too. EU exit more widely, we're looking at the future arrangements for structural funds and common agricultural policy arrangements, how that will be applied across the UK and particularly in Scotland. But the digital aspect of that remains very important to us too, about even aspects of the location of cloud storage arrangements, the universality of the GDPR that follows. So we're keeping a close eye on that and thinking about how best the audit will respond to that through our programme.
Good. That's really helpful to know that. Final point from me, Convener, to the Auditor General, it's just about wider public sector contracts and procurement. Will you have time to look at this? And there's possibly a post-Brexit element to that too. I haven't noticed if we've done that for a wee while, and particularly, some of the members in the past have asked about Scottish Water, for example, that we haven't seen them covered by your programme of work for a wee while. So maybe just something broader in the public sector procurement contracts, and maybe a post-Brexit dimension to that. But have you any plans to include that, or is there no time to cover everything?
So you're right. There's as we've spoken about, it's always about prioritisation. You know, so unfortunately, we'll not be able to cover everything. Having said that, one of the key premises in preparing this programme is looking for some degree of flexibility. And we said none of us know what's going to happen, so we want this to be quite an agile programme that can respond to circumstances. And Anthony may want to say a wee bit in a moment about the procurement and some of the red flag, I think, document that we recently produced. But in terms of Scottish Water, and I'm aware of the committee's interest in this, and that as a large public body, it's not necessarily been in front of the committee terribly much in recent years, although I think not my predecessor, but one prepared a report on Scottish Water a number of years back. We're in close contact with all our auditors, including the auditors of Scottish Water. As we touched on in the conversation with Mr Beattie, we're awaiting the conclusion of a number of audits before we decide upon what further reporting might be necessary. So once we receive the final judgments of Scottish Water's auditor, we can decide where to go with that next.
Procurement is obviously something that each of the appointed auditors will think about when they're planning their audit programmes. So it's something that does feature as part of our audit universe, for want of a better phrase. It's something that would be picked up, at least in part, by the annual audit process. But I think what I'm hearing today is a very clear message from you, and I think I've heard it from the committee before about this being quite an important strategic issue of interest for you. And the purpose of coming here today, I think, was to consult the committee on things that really matter. So it's definitely something we want to go away and think about before we come back with final proposals early next year.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Convener. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr Coffey. And I'm now going to go to Neil Bibby, MSP, who is also joining us remotely. We seem to have lost... Oh, there we go.
Morning. Good morning, Auditors General. Thank you, Convener. Two of the key themes of the work programme, as I mentioned already, are supporting jobs and economic growth, as well as looking and tackling inequalities and the impact of COVID-19. Very much welcome this to ensure we're having a look at the impact on both these areas. I very much welcome or support what the convener said earlier about looking at the impact of BAME and race inequalities and how they have been exacerbated throughout COVID. But a key issue that I think relates to both of economic growth and also inequalities is the issue of regional inequality and regional inequalities. COVID has not affected all parts of Scotland the same. My own region has been particularly hard hit by COVID. Inverclyde has the highest COVID death rates in the whole of Scotland. It also has the most deprived community in all of Scotland. Western Bartonshire has the second highest COVID death rate in Scotland, and has the second employment rate in Scotland. So can I ask, in both your work on jobs, supporting jobs, economic growth, but also when you're looking at inequalities, to look at the impact of COVID on regions, but also look at regional inequality as part of your work on both the economy and also inequalities too.
Auditor General.
Thank you, Mr Bibby. Yeah, you're quite right. We're very happy to receive that feedback and capture that in the work that we'll be doing, both on inequalities and economy and the skills-related angle to that. I think it is important that that level of analysis is there through our own reporting and also through the public reporting that public bodies in Inverclyde, Western Bartonshire, the examples you mentioned, and the Scottish Government is able to report. So we're very happy to capture that feedback, and we'll take that back as we prepare our programme.
Thanks, Auditor General. The Scottish, just to flag up, the Scottish Government, you may be aware, the Scottish Government used to have a cohesion target which aimed to reduce the employment gap between regions within Scotland, but this was stopped at the end of 2017 after it showing the employment gap was increasing. So I'd also welcome if you could look at the effectiveness of perhaps of previous targets initiatives to look at regional inequality, but also look at see what other measures and actions could be taken to address this.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take that away and think about how best to do that. The other one is maybe worth drawing to your attention. I think we're signalling in the paper our interest in child poverty arrangements, talked about inequality and how that's clearly not been felt, the impact of the pandemic. So we're thinking about just the progress against the Child Poverty Scotland Act 2017, both about the upcoming interim arrangements in 23-24, and then thereafter towards the end of the decade about progress towards that. So there's a connection there, so we're just conscious of all of these points and making sure that we capture them appropriately in our programme.
Thanks, Auditor General. Also wanted, that's very helpful. I also want to ask you about care homes. The biggest failure, I think, in this pandemic has been the tragic situation in our care homes. And I asked the former Auditor General about this before the summer, and given assurance that the Audit Scotland would be looking at this as part of the NHS overview and also the Health and Social Care report. Can I get, given the public interest in this and the concerns of care workers and staff, can you give a reassurance that we will be looking in detail at the situation in care homes and what lessons can be learned?
Yeah, so there's a number of aspects to our programme that we touch on our care home arrangements in Scotland. So the NHS overview report you mentioned will think about parts of this. We're also signalling in the paper today that we are interested in, I suppose, the longer-term sustainability of the social care model in Scotland. You're right that my predecessor has prepared a number of reports about the success or the pace of health and social care integration. So we're going to continue that theme, but we also plan to do a specific piece of work about, as I say, the sustainability of the social care model in Scotland. And we've mentioned before that we're working with our colleagues in other UK audit agencies on this to shape and scope that work. So it's very much part of our thoughts.
Thanks, Auditor General. Can I just also ask, will you be looking at the human and financial cost of the issue of discharging patients, elderly patients, into care homes? Will you be looking at that issue?
So, as we've all heard over the past few days, the very significant impact of COVID in our care homes and the personal tragedies that's impacted upon individual families. I think we're thinking really carefully about where we best add value in that process. So we have a range of strands of work that we've touched on, whether it's the NHS overview report, future work that we'll do on health and social care integration, and the sustainability of social care in Scotland. Whether that then addresses the point specifically that you're making about the impact on human and financial cost of the discharge into care homes, I think it's one for us to think about carefully about where we fit into that process, whether it's us or other organisations. But it's one we can take away, Mr Bibby, and see where that best fits in our work.
Thank you, Auditor General. Thank you, Convener.
Now hand over to Alec Neil, who's also joining us remotely.
Thank you, Convener. Can I ask the Auditor General, first of all, about an issue that we discussed with his predecessor, and that was the extent to which his recommendation reports actually implemented properly and timiously. So can I ask the Auditor General, I know governments elsewhere in the UK have special units that I think measure and are also responsible for ensuring that the auditor's recommendations are implemented. I don't think such a unit exists in the Scottish Government yet, although I think there's been talk about it. But is this an area that really requires some attention?
It's a very interesting point, Mr Neil. And in my previous role, I was the Auditor of the Scottish Government, and working alongside the previous Auditor General. And we were very keen to stress that point to the Scottish Government about the need for an action tracker of recommendations, both in terms of local audit work and through the Section 22 reporting and through the Section 23 reporting as well. It's really important that it's part of the continuous loop, as it were, of audit, that following recommendations. And I know it's a key area of interest that the committee check with witnesses that you receive whether public bodies have accepted the recommendations. More often than not, those recommendations are accepted, and therefore it's really incumbent upon public bodies to show evidence that they have implemented the recommendations. We're still following through that, absolutely locally with our auditors. Whether that necessitates more structure around it within government, I think it's a conversation to take away from today's meeting. In the event that recommendations, Mr. Neil, aren't being followed through, it's one that we wouldn't be slow in pointing out to public bodies and if necessary, bringing back to the committee's attention.
So are you satisfied that although there isn't a formal structure for implementing your recommendations or ensuring they're implemented across government and its agencies, are you satisfied that a very high proportion of your recommendations are in fact implemented?
I perhaps wouldn't have a kind of a proportion in mind. I think what we would do, certainly through the conversations that we have with the auditors of public bodies, is to continually test that with them. It's a key part of auditors' work to follow through the progress of implementation of recommendations. If that's not happening, we're clear that it's a need to report that publicly. I think I've got an open mind at the moment as to whether that necessitates more structure than already exists. But as I say, I think I'm confident in the fact that where it hadn't previously been happening in public bodies, that was reported publicly. And if that happens again, we'll make sure that the same thing happens.
Okay. And on a related issue about sponsorship departments within government, I mean, we've seen most recently with the Gaelic board issue, but also in the health service and in education and in a range of services, where the Scottish Police Authority was a classic example where the sponsoring department, in my view, and I think in the view of the rest of the committee, didn't do what we would have expected it to do. So is there a need to have a look at what really is the role, what's the remit of sponsoring departments? Because I don't think it's actually ever been spelled out. I don't think there's a document anywhere that can tell you what the role of the sponsoring department is. And is there not a need to look at that and for you actually to do some work on how effective sponsoring departments are at particularly spotting problems and then solving them before they become crises?
It's an issue that we have thought about repeatedly and returned to, typically on the back of where sponsorship arrangements haven't been as effective as we would have expected them to be. And you're quite right that the committee itself has considered numerous examples of where sponsorship arrangements haven't been as effective as you would have expected. I think it's probably one for us to take away, Mr. Neil, to think about where we are going to best add value in this as to the effectiveness of sponsorship or others. I would say I know the government is taking it seriously. They are also thinking about, particularly on the back of some of the recent sessions that you've held, about what more guidance and support that they are providing to public bodies on this. And alongside that, I'll think about, in conjunction with colleagues, as to where we best fit into testing the adequacy of sponsorship arrangements nationally. We are doing it locally every year and reporting as necessary, but we'll take that one away to think about where that could fit in our programme.
And can I ask, to the best of your knowledge, is there somewhere documentation that spells out the role of sponsoring departments? Certainly as a minister for well over 7 years, I never came across any such document, but it may well have been created since then. But is there any documentation of what the role of the sponsorship department is, what its mission in life is, what its objectives are, and what it's expected to achieve?
Anthony may want to come in a moment, but I think that, I guess the two examples that I would point to, one would be what's covered in the Scottish Public Finance Manual. We'll set out aspects of the relationship between the sponsoring department and the public body. But I guess more importantly, the framework agreement that exists between each public body and the Scottish Government, which sets out those roles and responsibilities, which should cover how sponsoring will work between the two organisations. They'll be different, of course, for... So, for example, there'll be a framework agreement between the Gaelic board and the sponsoring department? So I think whether there's I'm not perhaps able to comment whether there's a specific one and how up to date it is between Scottish Government and the Gaelic Board. But my expectation, and I think that of Scottish Government too, is that there will be a framework agreement for every public body. And I think it's an important point, though, is that that's up to date and there's a shared understanding of how sponsoring is working between the sponsoring department and the public body.
Could I ask, would you be able to furnish the committee with a list of where there is or isn't framework agreements, and where there are framework agreements, how old they are, and some sample copies of them?
I'll have a look, Mr Neil, as to what we have in our organisation. I suspect that that's probably the Scottish Government themselves would be better placed to provide the committee with that list. I'd be surprised if they don't have that information really very readily available to set out to you which public bodies have framework agreements and when they were last reviewed, and importantly when they're next due for review.
Okay, a good suggestion. I'd be interested to see the one between the Gaelic Board and the sponsoring department. Can I move to another wider issue? And that is, and the Scottish Police Authority is a very good example of it, potentially the enterprise network, because we now have, as well as Scottish Enterprise, we've got Business Gateway, which is run through the local authorities. We've got Highlands and Islands Enterprise. We now have South of Scotland Enterprise, not to mention a range of other organisations like SDI and so on. But both in terms of the police and enterprise functions, I think they're good examples of where we perhaps, on occasion, instead of just looking at the individual organisations, such as the Scottish Police Authority or Scottish Enterprise or the other enterprise agencies, we should be taking a more systemic look as to whether that function is operating the way it should be. I mean, obviously, there's an outstanding issue that we have in relation to the Scottish Police Authority, and taking forward the suggestion that there should be, by Scottish Government, a systemic look at the whole police family. And I know you're familiar and aware of all of that discussion. But taking that as one example, enterprise, I think, is another example. From time to time, would it not be worthwhile use the Auditor General taking a systemic approach and looking at the family, the enterprise family, the police family, the education family, to see if the system is working, as opposed to just whether an individual organisation is performing?
Yes, you're right. And I'll ask Anthony to come in a moment with some examples of where our thinking is in that space. Justice, for example, we captured in the report, looking at both community justice arrangements in Scotland, the impact of COVID on courts, and the Justice Committee themselves have recently produced a report on the circumstances there. So there are times when I think, as you're suggesting, we'll want to do a thematic look across a whole system, whether justice, policing, and very much so enterprise as well. So these are all very relevant and appropriate things for us to do with our time, that broadens out our analysis and judgments, not just on one public body at a time, but actually looking at the success of the policy implementation of justice, enterprise and skills across a range of bodies. And again, one of the things that we're very focused on is the success of that policy in terms of outcomes. Has it delivered what it originally intended to do? So that's very much part of our thinking. But Anthony, you may wish to add.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr Neely, you might remember a couple of years ago we brought a report to the committee on supporting economic growth, the role of Scotland's enterprise agencies, that looked at the role of Highlands and Islands Enterprise and Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government. So we have taken that kind of overarching umbrella view in the past. And it's certainly part of our thinking at the moment in terms of the work we may do on supporting jobs, business and enterprise, and also on the skills and job work. So it's very much part of our thinking at the moment. As Stephen said, I mean, we haven't finalised the programme yet, and we'll be coming back to you early next year. So we'll certainly want to reflect on your suggestions at that time. But there will be difficult choices, because sometimes there might be specific issues that are best approached on an individual body basis. Other things are best done regionally and nationally. We'll need to weigh all that up in the round when we think about the overall shape of the programme.
I'll read that when I'm sunning myself in retirement, Anthony. Thank you.
That's not the prettiest of sight to imagine as we come to a close on this session, Mr. Neil, but thank you for that anyway. Are there any final supplementary questions from any colleagues? And I'll give an extra moment for those that are joining us remotely. No indication of any supplementary questions. If not, thank you so much, Auditor General and Anthony Clark, for your evidence this morning. And I now close the public part of this session as we move into private session.